Hello there and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is the L24 Midnight News, and coming up next in our news program. Algerian Foreign Minister Mr. Ramadan Al-Mamra met with a number of his counterparts on the sideline of the Paris Peace Forum. Tens of thousands of Palestinians gathered at Gaza City Park to mark the 80th anniversary of late leader Yasser Arafat's death. EU foreign ministers will discuss on Monday imposing a new set of sanctions on Iran. Hello there and welcome. I'm your host Abdulrahim Kashur, and those were today's top stories. First, the proceedings of the 5th edition of Paris Peace Forum kicked off on Friday in the French capital with the participation of the Minister of Foreign Affairs and National Community Abroad, Mr. Ramadan Al-Mamra, in his capacity as a representative of the President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune. Using this high-level forum held under the theme Overcoming the Multi-Crisis, participants examined the main international political, security, economic, energy, and environmental challenges and how to address them collectively and effectively. On this occasion, Mr. Al-Mamra held bilateral talks with his counterparts from Netherlands, Senegal, Rwanda, Norway, Croatia, and Palestine, as well as with the High Representative of the European Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Josep Borrell. The second committee of the UN General Assembly voted in favor of the permanent sovereignty of Palestinian people over the natural resources in the Palestinian territories, including East Al-Quds. A total of 151 member states voted in favor of the resolution. 7 voted against it, including Canada and the United States, and 10 members stated abstained from voting. According to the Palestinian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Riyad al-Maliki, voting in favor of the resolution affirms the right of Palestinians and their sovereignty over their natural resources, including land, water, and energy. Tens of thousands of Palestinians gathered at Gaza City Park to mark the 80th anniversary of late leader Yasser Arafat's death. Schools across the West Bank dedicated their first class to highlighting the role played by Arafat in the Palestinian struggle against the decade-long Zionist occupation. Yasser Arafat was memorable and a historical figure of the Palestinian cause. He undertook the leadership of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Yasser Arafat, known as Abu Ammar, passed away on November 11, 2004. The Libyan Presidential Council met with various political parties in the capital, Tripoli, to discuss the latest developments in the country, notably with regard to the political statement following the failure of efforts to reach a political agreement on the constitutional basis. The parties called on the Presidential Council to assume its responsibilities toward the Libyan state by speeding up the holding of elections likely to meet the aspiration of the Libyan people. A torrent of protests and indignation over the Moroccan budget law for 2023 led by trade unions due to the expansion of the tax base and the imposition of fees on vital sectors. The Moroccan finance bill carries new tax procedures requiring lawyers to automatically make a tax advance with the workers in the costs found on each file at each stage of lawsuit when filing or registering a lawsuit request or appeal. Human rights bodies have condemned the use of defamation by Mahzen regime to tarnish the reputation of opponents in Morocco. The policies of the Moroccan authorities are based on arbitrary and repressive practices against activists and human rights defenders in the kingdom. The human rights bodies also denounced the persistence of the Rabat authorities in publishing articles aimed at damaging the reputation of every voice raised in opposition of the Makhzen regime. The African Union Peace and Security Council holds today a decisive meeting on Chad. The 15 members of this body responsible for the prevention, management and resolution of conflicts will examine a report by the Council's chairman, Moussa Faki, who calls for sanctions against the transitional power led by President Mahamat Idriss Déby. In his report, Faki calls on the African Council to condemn what he called the killings, torture, arbitrary arrest, and custody of hundreds of civilians and impose sanctions against the transitional power in Chad. On Friday, the authorities of the Tigray region denied that the Ethiopian army had taken control of 70% of the territory. A spokesman, Gachwe Reda, said in a statement to the media in response to the Ethiopian army that announcements that these statements are baseless, while humanitarian sources denied the arrival of any aid there. A denial comes more than a week after the Ethiopian government and the Tigray Liberation Front reached an agreement to stop the 2-year-old fighting after marathon negotiations in South Africa. More than 500,000 children are at risk of dying in Somalia due to the dangerous trilogy of hunger, drought, and poverty that's ravaging that reality. The United Nations warns of the danger of worsening situation that may lead to the death of more innocent. According to the warnings of the United Nations, an imminent disaster, unlike any disaster faced this century, this country and Somalia today more than ever needs urgent aid. Ukraine's president said Friday that special military units have entered the city of Kherson in a video just hours after Russia said it had completed withdrawing troops from the strategic city. President Vladimir Zelensky said our defenders are approaching the city, but special units are already in the city. Videos and photos on social media showed residents happily taking to the streets, waving Ukrainian flags and chanting in celebration. A Ukrainian flag flew over a monument in the central Kherson Square for the first time since the city was seized in early March.
Today is a historic day. We are returning the south of our country, returning Kherson. As of now, our defenders are on the approach to the city. There is still quite a bit left, and we are starting to enter, but special units are already in the city. The people of Kherson are waiting. They never gave up on Ukraine. Hope for Ukraine is always justified, and Ukraine always returned its own. I'm happy to see new people, despite all the threats, despite the repression and abuse of the occupiers. Protected the Ukrainian flags, believed in Ukraine, and even when the city is not yet completely cleaned of the enemy prisons, the people of Kherson themselves are already removing Russian symbols and any traces of the occupiers' presence in Kherson from the streets and buildings.
To a different matter now, the French government announced its decision to welcome on an exceptional basis the humanitarian ship Ocean Viking, with 230 migrants on board rescued in the Mediterranean, faced with Rome's refusal to let the ship dock on its shores. Hussein Berkan.
After 3 weeks of wandering with uncertainty, the humanitarian ship Ocean Viking docked at 8:50 this morning at the military port of Toulon in the south of France, with the 230 migrants rescued in the Mediterranean on board. after Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's refusal to welcome the ship chartered by the NGO SOS Méditerranée. And describing France's reaction aggressive and incomprehensible, the French authorities, in partnership with the International Federation of the Red Cross, finally agreed to welcome the ship under what they called exceptionally a duty of humanity.
Cioè, che cos'è che fa arrabbiare?
What exactly makes them so angry? The fact that Italy must be the only possible port of disembarkation for migrants in the Mediterranean? Because this is not written in any agreement. I want to question my counterparts on this. Should Italy be, by choice, the only possible port of disembarkation for migrants arriving from Africa? I think this doesn't seem right.
Io credo che questo non sia, giusto.
The announcement was made Thursday by French Interior Minister Gérald Darmanin. 9 other European countries have also pledged to welcome 2/3 of the 230 migrants collected by the Ocean Viking. According to Darmanin, Croatia, Romania, Bulgaria, Lithuania, Malta, Portugal, Luxembourg, and Ireland will welcome these migrants in the name of European solidarity. Germany alone should welcome more than 80 people. The French Interior Minister clarified that the refugees who will be allowed to set foot on European soil are those who are eligible for asylum. The others will be taken back to their countries of origin. Their arrival in France is particularly tense on the far right, while the left and environmentalists welcome the decision, calling it worthy of the values of France.
EU foreign ministers will discuss Monday imposing new sanctions on Iran over its deadly crackdown on protests and support for Russia and Ukraine. The EU had already imposed sanctions against Iran on October 17, targeting the morality police and 11 officials, including the country's telecommunication minister, over alleged involvement in repressing the protests.
Will be suggesting additional listings that would be added to Iranian listings to the sanction list from European side. I think that we agree on that, so that it would have two parts for Iranian participation in war on Russia's side in Ukraine, but also for the human rights abuses that are happening in the cities of Iran.
European Commission delivered in its autumn economic forecast on Friday, with the technical recession across the bloc expected to come before a return to growth in 2023. And the regular forecast for the 19 countries sharing the euro, European Economic Commissioner expected the economy to contract in the last quarter of 2022 and continue to shrink in the first 3 months of the coming year, mainly as a result of the energy price surge. Chinese President Xi Jinping and his U.S. counterpart Joe Biden will meet for the first time face-to-face during the G20 summit held in the city of Bali in Indonesia. Both leaders are expected to discuss ways to work together at a time of high tensions between the two countries. Nabil Khazin.
It will be the first face-to-face meeting since the election of Joe Biden. The presidents of the two superpowers, China and the United States, will meet in Indonesia on the sidelines of the G20 summit. The meeting comes at a time of heightened tensions between Beijing and Washington, D.C., and following the Chinese leader Xi Jinping saying his country stands ready to work with the United States to find the right way to get along with each other in this new era.
中美关系保持稳定发展。
China has always regarded and developed its relations with the United States on the basis of the three principles proposed by President Xi Jinping: mutual respect, peaceful coexistence, and win-win cooperation.
The White House announced as well that the two leaders will discuss how to responsibly manage the China-US rivalry while trying to work together where both countries' interests coincide. Joe Biden also wants to talk about Russia. He would like China to distance itself from Moscow, not to mention North Korea at a time when Pyongyang is increasing its missile launches. Washington would like Beijing to use its influence on North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Tensions between the two countries have dramatically escalated after Beijing accused the U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi of further straining the bilateral relationship with a trip to Taiwan, which China considers part of its territory.
We'll have the opportunity as an administration to brief Taiwan on the results of that meeting, and I'm confident that they will feel very secure and comfortable in the United States' position when it comes to our support for peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait and our commitment to the Taiwan Relations Act, which does commit the United States to ensuring we're providing the articles for Taiwan's defense.
Expectations for the Bali meeting are low, as it is more of an effort to keep open lines of communication between the rivals and is not expected to generate any kind of joint statement.
2 days after Americans went to the polls, the political world remained on tenterhooks on the Thursday, with both chambers of the U.S. Congress up for grabs as elections carefully tallied hundreds of thousands of votes in a process that could take days to resolve. Officials in Arizona, where a key Senate race is still undecided, said that the counting will go on until next week.
We're not going to, anywhere from 60 to 80 perhaps will be released every day. You guys can do the math. And we have 400 to 410,000. We'll be mostly done by early next week. And then, of course, Mr. Richard talked about the curing process. By state law, people have until Wednesday to cure any signature that's still questionable out there. So that's a small, tiny percentage of the total number of voters that will vote in this election. But yeah, that's when we'll get closer.
U.S. President Joe Biden addressed the COP27 climate conference in Egypt on Thursday, saying that the global climate crisis was about human and economic security. President Joe Biden used his short visit to the United Nations Climate Change Summit to tell the world that the United States was ready to take back its leadership role on fighting a warming planet.
$150 billion in spending. The climate crisis is about human security, economic security, environmental security, national security, and the very life of the planet. We immediately rejoined the Paris Agreement. We convened major climate summits and reestablished. I apologize, you ever pulled out of the agreement.
Southeast Asian leaders kicked off on ASEAN summit in Cambodia on Friday, with Myanmar's political crisis and U.S.-China rivalry expected to dominate the discussion. Cambodia, which is this year a chair for the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, is hosting the group's first in-person meeting since the COVID pandemic. In his opening speech, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called on Myanmar's authorities to release all political prisoners and launch an inclusive process to return to democratic transition.
I repeat my call on the Myanmar authorities to release all political prisoners and launch an inclusive process immediately to return to the democratic transition. This is the only route to lasting peace and security.
A new report released yesterday by Food and Agricultural Organization of United Nations said that world food import bill is estimated to rise to $1.94 trillion in 2022, higher than previously expected. The new forecast presented in FAO Food Outlook would mark an all-time high and a 10% increase over the record level of 2021. And now for more international news, let's follow this roundup.
Beijing has closed city parks and imposed other restrictions as the country faces a new wave of COVID-19 cases, even as millions of people remained under lockdown in the west and the south of China. The country reported more than 10,000 new cases on Friday, almost all of them testing positive while showing no symptoms. More than 5 million people were under lockdown on Friday in the southern manufacturing hub Guangzhou and the western megacity Chongqing, with the bulk of Beijing's 21 million people undergoing near-daily testing. Another 118 new cases were recorded in this sprawling city.
Tens of thousands in Warsaw marched peacefully Friday in a yearly Independent Day march organized by Polish nationalist groups that included some anti-Ukrainian and anti-European Union slogans. The march is controversial because it's led by far-right groups and has included violence and white nationalists in past years. But many people, including some with young children, also march, seeing the event purely as a way to show patriotism. Many drove hundreds of kilometers to Warsaw to take part.
A powerful underwater earthquake struck Friday off Tonga in the southern Pacific, prompting authorities to issue a tsunami advisory. The U.S. Geological Survey said the magnitude 7.3 quake was centered 211 kilometers east-southeast of Naifu. It predicted strong shaking but said the probability of serious damage or casualties was small.
Argentina's social organizations doubled their calls on President Alberto Fernandez's government, demanding more help to counter the effects of inflation, with marches and blockades in the streets of Buenos Aires. First columns of protesters gathered in different parts of the capital and will then march towards the Ministry of Social Development, whose minister, Victoria Tolosa Paz, is facing the first major protests since taking office a month ago.
Coming up now to Qatar, with the start of the World Cup just over a week away, fans from all over the world have already begun descending on the Doha and are mixing with the locals fans who are picking their favorite squads to support. The Brazil fan contingent claims to be the largest in Qatar, and they did not disappoint as they marched near the National Museum of Qatar dressed in Brazilian green and yellow. Brazil's South American rivals Argentina also had a celebrating walk in the streets of Doha on Friday. A way of Latins, the French Football Fans Club India also brought together a group of fans hoping to see the defending champions claim the crown again. And from Qatar to UK, after being mostly silent for past 5 years, the great bell of the great clock at the Palace of Westminster, known to you all as the Big Ben, is scheduled to return to full-time service on Sunday. 2 minutes of silence at 11 a.m. on Sunday will mark the official return of Elizabeth Tower's bell. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. For more updates, you can follow our social media platform as well as Al24 official website. For now, good night.